Welcome to everyone joining on our webinar online today. Now, many brands and agencies are heading into the planning phase of their year when it comes to their digital marketing strategy. With that comes a big discussion on what has worked, maybe what hasn't worked. As consumer confidence starts to take a dip again and marketing budgets are tightening, brands and agencies want to know what they can do to avoid media dollar wastage and putting value to every dollar they spend on the market. Now, with so many measurement options available in market, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. Many marketing managers may get a bit of measurement paralysis and probably ask themselves, what's the best way to measure my campaign? For many marketing managers, that may sound like, how long is a piece of string? To introduce myself, I'm Seb and I'm the Senior Digital Solutions Lead at Bench. Today, we'll be talking to our three very esteemed guests from all different parts of the marketing industry and seeing how they use measurement tactics to dictate a successful campaign. Now, if you guys have any questions online, please feel free to pop them into the chat and we'll answer them throughout today's session. For anything we don't get to, we'll reach out to you directly after today's webinar. To start, I'll ask that each of our three lovely guests introduce themselves, their titles and what they do. Starting with you, Steph.
Thank you. I'm Steph. I work at the trade desk and I've been there now for 3 years. I work as an associate account director, working across a range of agencies and also direct clients.
Lovely. Steve?
Hi, I'm Steve Sinha. I'm Australian Managing Director for Analytic Edge, global leader in marketing effectiveness modelling.
Lovely. And Nate?
Awesome. I'm Nate. I'm a senior account manager at Bench, so I look after a portfolio of brands and agencies right through from strategy through to reporting on their digital marketing campaigns.
All right, thanks guys. Let's get straight into it. All right, topic 1, planning to measure. Now, when you do plan, it's important to understand what you want to achieve so that you can keep your total investment accountable, but also measure the success of specific media channels or targeting certain audiences. Steve, I'll throw to you. We've leaned today's webinar to focus on digital media, but it would be remiss of us not to quickly talk about the role of traditional media. For marketers listening that are responsible for both online and offline budgets and have challenges planning between the two, what's one piece of advice you'd give to them to balance out these mediums?
Yeah, well, look, I think it's really important for marketers to take a very holistic approach to measurement. The key output is to understand how all marketing activities combine to increase sales. So, although a lot of digital-based attribution, can help you take media planning selection decisions inside a digital ecosystem, it falls a long way short from broader-based budget setting. And I think to your opening point, Seb, the silver bullet that we now have is that this time of year you can actually get to a task-based marketing P&L. You can use that then to predict certain inputs and certain marketing activities exactly what sales you think you can generate incrementally from marketing. And again, I think in a lot of the scenarios that people are probably facing in the next couple of months, we're in a very mixed offline and online world. So if you look at a lot of major brands, their spend is probably roughly 50-50 offline digital, or it swings 60-40 either way. So if you looked at a spectrum, most major brands are sitting somewhere between 60-40 either way, or are close to 50-50. There's very few people operating in one or the other. So you're trying to take decisions in a very mixed environment. So again, an example of that would be the world of video. People know that there's going to be some kind of combination of offline and online, video formats is going to be the best outcome. But how do you measure that as a totality? So again, everyone's sort of trying to quantify and plan with these very, very mixed effects. And so obviously, I'm here to wear that hat, marketing effectiveness modelling and MMM modelling can help you establish that broader framework. So again, absolutely in that sort of broader scenario, it can allow you to identify the ROI of online versus offline, and you can get to sales response curves for both on and offline, and then optimise together in scenario plan.
Yeah, awesome. So I guess what you're saying is we can't really understate traditional media and the role it takes also on digital media as well. They work in tandem effectively.
Absolutely. And I think across both divides now, at one point it was probably is offline brand and long term, and is digital short term and performance. Increasingly, there's different tactics in both that might do either. So again, it's not necessarily so linear that you add one short term to complement the other long term. There are long term and short term effects in both. And you're probably going to need a combination of both. So it's absolutely trying to work things out across that whole mix.
Yeah, makes sense. And to you, Nate, we know that digital marketing has an impact on traditional media. Focusing on digital media, though, as a hero of this webinar, I think a good marketer would say that in order to effectively measure, the planning process is pretty crucial. What advice would you have to planning digital campaigns so that outcomes are driven? What's one or two key advice or tips that you'd have to kind of help marketers through this process?
Yeah, definitely. I think, to Steve's point, planning is really important, and now is a perfect time of year for people to start planning. I think from a digital perspective, when people are starting to plan campaigns and what they're going to measure as well, we see far too often marketers fall into that trap of either going towards the shiny measurement opportunities and planning their campaign around the cool measurement things that you can do, or they don't decide on those things that they want to measure early enough. So then they're somewhat down the line and they're like, oh, it would be great to have measured this, and they've missed the kind of bus there. So I think from a kind of suggestions on best practice and what you could do from a tips and tricks perspective, stripping it back to basics is really a key thing. So understanding the objective of what the campaign is trying to achieve, how that aligns with your business objectives, what the challenge might be that you're trying to overcome, that will really give you an idea of what measurement you should be planning and what could benefit you most. And I think a really easy way of doing that is kind of looking at the structure of your campaigns as well. So each channel within your marketing plan, whether it's going to be a digital channel or a traditional media channel, understanding what the goal of that specific channel is, how that feeds into the other channels within the strategy, and then, mapping that out. I tend to find that if we start with something as simple as like an Excel spreadsheet, or even really back to basics on, a piece of paper or whiteboard with the team, you can really map stuff out and see how everything flows into it, and you really get a holistic kind of plan on a page.
Yeah, awesome. So I guess what I gather from that is that planning really dictates the framework that you always measure against. So Steph, I know your role in helping clients plan is super important. What do you ask clients to consider when planning digital media?
Yeah, I think planning is increasingly important. And to Nate's point, you have to have everything laid out for you. So the first thing that I ask clients is think about what your goals actually are and make sure that you're shifting, KPIs to real business outcomes, what's actually happening in the world. If you're thinking about things further down the funnel, is it intent and purchase? What conversions do you want to track? You have to think about having a pixel down from the start, not halfway through, because you want the full picture, the full user journey, and to be able to understand how your user is engaging along the way at every touch point.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. All right, so now taking on topic 2, which is measuring brand awareness. So we've established that planning is crucial, tick. Let's look at a range of measurement techniques that can work for different industries and objectives. Question for you, Steph. If I was a challenger brand who was launching into market and looking at starting up my own marketing journey and making my intended audience aware of who I am, what's my challenge? And how should I then measure the success of that challenge?
Yeah, so if you're a challenger brand, your goal really is to drive awareness and penetrate the market. You're going to be spending a lot in terms of your budgets in advertising to essentially win the hearts and minds of consumers and your consumers. But how do you measure a heart and a mind? That's a bit of a challenge in itself. If we look back at the past, if you're a challenger brand 20 years ago, you were investing big budgets into traditional channels, with the measurement of just mass reach. Now you can spend a fraction of that budget advertising, but at the same time being able to measure the hypothesis that you have. You can work with agencies like yourself, Bench, to test these hypotheses. I think it's really important as a challenger brand to really focus on real world outcomes, to test hypothesis and also measure what matters the most, because what you can then look at is what's working, what's not working, and then be able to pivot your strategy accordingly. If we look at measurement on digital itself, we've come a long way from clicks. You know, a click is not just the sole indicator of a user's interest. You're missing out on that full story. And as a challenger brand, you want to pick partners that you can work with to really measure uplift. What's going to be important for this challenger brand is having a solid measurement framework, and I think that's going to be pivotal for their growth. And if you're focusing on awareness, the first thing that comes to mind is, of course, brand lift studies, which is your first entry point into measurement. At the Trade Desk, I work with a bunch of clients that want to measure lift in some way or another, and we partnered with the best in market, like your Lucid, Nielsen Brand Lift, Kantar, InMobi Pulse, to be able to measure uplift. Brand lift studies really give you valuable insight into whether your ads resonate with your target audience. So as a challenger brand, you know, the first thing that you can ask your audience is, which of the following brands have you heard of? You know, did your creative drive enough awareness for your brand to be top of mind for consumers? If it did, great, tick, you've done your job. If it didn't, then you need to pivot your strategy and, you know, shift your dollars elsewhere, maybe change the creative.
Yeah. Nate, especially from your sense, measurement's come a long way since impressions and clicks, as Steph said. You've had some client experiences in trying to garner more awareness and running brand lift studies. What experiences can you share from that?
Yeah, definitely. I think first up, post-COVID, there's obviously been a lot of challenger brands come to market, whether that be during that kind of COVID period or in the kind of months that have followed. And I think the rise of TikTok as well, or channels similar to that, we've seen a lot of people just kind of rely on this like virality, which obviously isn't necessarily going to be the key to success for every business. So making sure that you've got a solid awareness strategy in place and you're able to measure that is something that I find myself repeating to challenger brands, but even bigger brands that we have come through as well. I think often there's a big focus on that conversion and driving a set number of sales or whatever, which makes sense because that's how you make your money as a brand, and we totally get it. But on top of that, you can't expect somebody to purchase something from you if you haven't won their mind and heart, as Steph has said, or if they're not aware of you. So stuff like brand lift studies, I've seen on both ends of the spectrum, from like smaller challenger SMBs right up to larger enterprise size businesses. Those brand lift studies really provide a lot of value in kind of proving where you currently are as a baseline in terms of what the awareness in market is, but it also gives you that ongoing ability to kind of track your brand awareness over time and see the impact of your campaign. Because if your creative, as Steph said, isn't driving impact and isn't creating that recognition for you, then you need to invest your money elsewhere or change your strategy. I think that's where brands like Tracksuit that have come to market recently, who are kind of offering that always on brand tracking, can really be useful as well. No longer are we having to pay for huge focus groups or massive awareness studies to be able to get this information. It's kind of really accessible to any brand size. So definitely something that every brand should be investing in for sure.
Yeah, and to your point, I think brand lift studies, especially more recently, have become very accessible. It's not too much to run it. You can run it within platform, on TikTok, on Facebook, on Trade Desk. It's not too hard to run, not too expensive. Steve, same question to you as a challenger brand looking to build awareness. How do you solve this challenge?
Yeah, look, I think we've probably, seen some interesting sort of developments. I think if you look at that whole space, let's call it either challenger brands and across to, emerging sort of digital pure play or e-commerce brands. I think some of the interesting learnings, often in modelling, we can express total sales as a percentage of either base, so what are the sales that you would make anyway, or that you derive from a non-marketing source like the weather or whatever, and then what is the incremental sale driven by marketing. And interestingly, I think with a lot of these emerging e-commerce and digital pure play brands that we're looking with very traditional brands, the base tends to be very high. Incremental sales of marketing are sometimes a lot lower than you think, but trying to optimize that has a real dollar advantage. With these emerging, I think, digital pure plays and e-commerce, the percentage of their sales that are incrementally driven by marketing can be really large. It can be as much as 40% of their total sales. So it becomes a really big number when people get it right. And then on top of that, often in addition, if you classify it as sort of organic effects, incremental sales through organic more organic, less paid marketing, again, can be significant. So that can be absolutely the dynamics around levers of CX and, either in-app messages, your CX dynamics on a website, organic content, so on and so forth. So suddenly, I think you can appreciate the importance of sort of paid marketing, the importance of organic levers, and then trying to understand those. And then I think within that context, actually, if you're then honing in on, and with a lot of those emerging brands, it can be really digital-based expenditure. Probably modelling has reinforced the effectiveness of digital marketing, digital activities for digital brands. And again, you can get into, even if, with a lot of those brands who are mainly, either exclusively or virtually only playing in a digital space, you can absolutely quantify what those successes are. So you can absolutely not only look at the ROI per platform, so, Facebook versus search versus Twitter or whatever, but you can actually then get into the executional weeds of all those. So, lots of people are looking at, say, how do we opt our, 6s versus 15s on YouTube, or looking at, how you would classify, Facebook executional placements in the funnel. And even brands that are fairly advanced in optimization are getting significant extra stretches by really getting into the detail of executional placements by a digital platform. So things can be really, I think really instructive. And probably the last bit, which I think is interesting to talk about, we recently wrote a white paper with Meta, I think, on the whole issue, obviously, of privacy and how that's affecting attribution. And obviously, I guess the hot topic is with more and more people being, taken out of the cookie pool, it's becoming harder and harder then to use traditional kind of digital attribution methodologies then to track effectiveness. And it was interesting. So we wrote a white paper with Meta. The data was based across 2021, and it was a longitudinal study of the online gaming category across APAC. So it's probably a lot of challenger brands in there, and effectively a lot of big brands that have appeared from nowhere and probably become big brands, virtually overnight. And interestingly, when you're measuring that through modelling, the ROI of Facebook remains pretty stable. So around an ROI of 1 up to 1.8, depending on campaign or whatever's happened. But through probably, more orthodox multi-touch attribution approaches, the bounce has become much bigger. And it's probably declined from ROIs of 2.8 down to 0.1, 0.2. And you've seen that decline and that margin of error grow really progressively as more and more digital IDs have been pulled out of the pool, if you like, through app tracking transparency, things like that. So absolutely, I think for challenger brands, if anything, some of those marketing levers are even more important because they've got less of a base, to rely on. It's more, you're still in that period of trying to, early stages of Ehrenberg Bass, trying to get your, a higher share of voice in people around you. But how do you, get a better conversion than more established brands? And probably the encouraging thing is, there's a lot of evidence to say if you get your digital marketing right within that, there are dividends to be had.
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to touch on the attribution piece further on in our chat, and how those platforms do work together and how they model effectively together. One thing you raised just then, which is really important, was talking about kind of the user experience once someone kind of gets to the website. Steph, to your point, if my challenger brand is looking at maybe garnering more traffic to website per se, or more consideration of my brand more than just awareness, what can you do in terms of what can Trade Desk do for kind of more engaging consumers more broadly?
Yeah, so as you move further down the funnel from awareness to consideration, I think thinking about all the user touch points, you're really thinking about how each user has a different device to now be able to look up new products or research new products, and even make purchases that they need to do. So we've launched our first free-to-market solution called Inferred Brand Intent, which allows you to be able to connect those dots between your ads and how they're influencing online behaviours. It really infers that customer intent based on whether they were researching sites with related keywords after being exposed to an ad. So What you can then glean from that is the inventory to understand what websites we're driving your audiences to, and then inform future strategies. You also have the ability to be able to create custom audiences based on the keywords that you've set. So for example, if you're, an electric auto brand, for example, and you have a competitor within that keyword, you can create an audience based on the users that were researching that competitor and then look to retarget them.
Yeah, awesome. So lots of different opportunities there, strategies there, brand uplift, modeling, IBI, for example. Great kind of strategies for challenger brands looking to get awareness. All right, so topic 3, measuring conversions. And I know, Steve, you touched on kind of measuring ROI and sales at that point for a challenger brand. Nate, question for you. So if we are talking about bottom of the funnel, which can be looked at from several angles, it's one thing to garner awareness, as you said, but most brands do want to see some kind of tangible result from their marketing activity, be it a sale or filling out a form on a website. Let's quickly touch on it. I know you mentioned it before, Steph, but Nate, how important is it to track online activity on your site?
I'd speak for most marketers here and say that it's the most important thing to be tracking. Steph did mention pixels briefly. And pixel-based measurement is really what's driving this kind of greater transparency around the effectiveness of our marketing activity in the digital space specifically. For those that are listening or watching that aren't familiar with pixels, they're essentially a small piece of code that's hidden into the back end of your website, ad or an email that allow us to track user behavior following exposure to that, whether somebody clicks on it or whether they've seen an ad, whatever it might be. It just gives us that transparency over what happens next, essentially. So most commonly, we see pixels being used to track conversions, whether that's a sale on an e-com site, somebody completing a form fill, or just even a level of engagement on a certain piece of content. So a lot of my brands, they like to track kind of scroll depth to show that people are engaging with content, particularly if it's like a government brand or a council. It's more about engaging the community. So you can still measure those kind of mid-funnel objectives using pixels as well, which is where they can really become quite powerful. And once we've started tracking these things as well, pixel-based measurement also then allows us to do things from an audience perspective and supercharging our audience strategies. So the most common way that you probably see it is really retargeting. So whether that be retargeting people on an e-commerce site who have added a product to the cart but not checked out, that constant kind of reminder. I know we've all experienced it, that pair of shoes that you've been looking at for weeks and haven't bought yet, that the Iconic are following you around with. So that's one of the most common ways that we see it. But you can also use those engagement metrics that I mentioned, like scroll depth, to assume that there's a certain level of interest or intent there and then continue to drive users down the funnel. Another really great way that we can use that data as well is building a lookalike audience off of those engagement kind of points. So whether that be completed purchases or completed form fills, we can feed that user information into an algorithm essentially, and platforms like the Trade Desk or Facebook across Meta's properties can build a lookalike audience and then target similar users who are most likely to also undertake that action. So not only are we able to track those conversions and prove the performance and effectiveness of your campaign, but you can use it to supercharge the future activity that you're running.
Yeah, cool. So pixels, super important. Now let's think about that with our challenger brand. So we've planned, we've worked out our branding, and we've tried to get awareness. Now we're looking at getting sales both online and in store, but we're no doubt doing this on many different channels. So we might be doing it programmatically through social channels like Facebook or TikTok, or maybe some search ads as well. Lots of these platforms can each be measured in silos, but there's often difficulty in being able to measure exactly how they impact each other. Steph, what solutions are you across?
Yeah, so I think the first point is, when you're running an omni-channel campaign, you really have the opportunity to tell a cohesive story, and measurement is what ties that all together. I talked about it before, consumers are on different devices at different times of the day, and you have so many different touch points. Nate said it exactly perfectly with the Iconic in that pair of shoes. You don't make a purchase decision overnight. And I think last click attribution, it's the easiest way to decide which touch points are driving conversions, but it doesn't account for your entire marketing strategy. You may have served your ad to a consumer throughout a fortnight period on different channels, be it CTV, audio, digital out of home, but it was on that last day before they made that conversion that it was a social ad that they clicked on. And so, you know, that conversion is tracked and 100% of that goes to social. So you're not really telling that full story of what happened. If you are running a search and social strategy alongside your programmatic activity and you want to tell that full story, at the Trade Desk, I'm across the Search and Social report, which allows you to measure the impact of the open internet on conversions. So this is proving the value of programmatic. What you're able to do is assess users who made an online purchase after navigating from Search and Social and what portions were or weren't exposed to that Trade Desk ad before they made that purchase. A lot of clients love this because it highlights that media doesn't operate in silos and that, last click is influenced by programmatic and being able to tie that all together. I think when we talk about all the different channels, it's really important as a challenger brand to really think about every single touch point that a user has had in terms of their conversion. And, hand in hand with that, path to conversion reporting is extremely important. It gives you the insights into the role that each channel plays, and it's pivotal in driving, a consumer to actual sales. What you can look at, and you have the proof now that which channel drove a faster time to convert. You can also look at the fact that having an omni-channel campaign can drive a faster time to convert. We worked with a brand that was only running one channel. They saw a case study where native and audio actually drove a faster time to convert. They then wanted to add that into their strategy, into their mix, and it worked for them. They were able to, tick that off. We worked with another brand who wanted to add in digital out of home, and they saw that actually drove a faster time to convert, and they then had the insights to prove that, and I think that's what's so important.
Yeah, you're right in saying that typically often it's those more branding-based channels that are getting cut through when there's not necessarily a direct sale attached to it. So, for example, path to conversion is a great way of showing the value of, for example, an online TV campaign or an out-of-home campaign. Just back to you on, I guess we've spoken about online measurement strategies. Taking that offline, what options do brands have who want to take an offline measurement approach, especially in a post-COVID world where maybe people are now starting to go back to brick and mortar stores? What options do we have there?
Yeah, I love this because programmatic advertising has actually really opened the doors for brands to be able to measure people physically going into the store. And that's all possible through footfall measurement. We partner with the likes of AdSquare, Foursquare and LifeSite to be able to measure, the fact that maybe you were served an ad on your CTV device and then you went to a physical store. We're able to measure that and really understand the causal impact of your ad on a person going into a store. I think if we look at it in a little bit deeper, like you're physically going to a store, but then you also want to look at the impact on sales. Retail data is actually helping brands close that loop between an ad and an in-store action. We have a unique integration with Flybuys where their shopper data actually flows directly into our platform. And so brands are able to optimize in flight. They can see which creative is actually driving sales. If they need to pivot strategies, they can do that on the fly. And I think that's really the holy grail of marketing, is being able to look at your ad and then have a look at the impact that it has on sales.
Yeah, I love that. So we've spoken about online measurement, offline measurement. Steve, question for you. You spoke about it before in terms of attribution. When we're looking at these channels operating in tandem, this does often become a question about attribution. Often measurement is attributed purely to search and social, as you said, kind of last click attribution, Steph. It means that brands can often overinvest incorrectly on search and social. Do you see there's often an over-reliance in search and social campaigns in driving lower funnel activity?
Yeah, so I think there's a big issue with search that probably transcends measurement, which is this whole idea of is it correlation or cause? And Steph talked about last touch attribution, so we know that Google have made a lot of money by saying last touch attribution means you give us a lot of money, and they did it very successfully in the 2000s and the 2010s. But I think it goes beyond that as well, and I think whatever your effectiveness and measurement methodology is, then it needs interpretation around those things. So absolutely, does search look like a good number because it's driving everything, or is that merely a reaction to demand created elsewhere? So I think even in the context of, say, modelling, you still need to put, sometimes search often looks very high, but you still need to interpret that, and you still need to interpret, is that a reflection of demand created elsewhere, or is it a driver? And absolutely, in some places it is. so for example, I think it's really important to be able to categorise and structure your digital media activity to understand those things. So I think one of the things that smart planners do will absolutely then categorise search as branded or non-branded, and you understand what parts of search might be then driving an acquisition, and what parts of it are purely reactive to something else. So those people that accurately categorise their different digital media activities will get a more nuanced read on what is really working or not working, whereas some people, if they've just lumped all their activities into very broad headings, might not be able to pull apart in reality the things they need to pull apart to answer that question. And look, it's interesting just in the scope of what you were talking about before, because there are a lot now of what you think of as traditional physical retail brands are now becoming really omni-channel. So there's a lot of major brands that you would think that we are working with at the moment that you would think of as traditional retailers that are probably, their e-commerce sales are now probably anywhere between 25 and 45% of their total sales. So it's, they are now significant omni-channel players. And so they're moving from probably trying to understand, are we doing digital things to influence search to get a physical retail sale, whereas now everything they do at some level is having both a e-commerce and a physical store effect. So it's very different. Whereas 5 years ago, a lot of those brands had made investments in e-commerce, but you look at them and all of them would have e-commerce sales of less than 10% of total sales. It was a tiny bit side. But now all these sort of traditional brands are becoming omni-channel retailers, and so I think it's really changed the demand. So I think it's all about, absolutely, the important thing, I think, especially when you get to that lower funnel stuff around search and even types of social, is making sure you classify everything really accurately. And then you can attempt to answer that bigger question, is it correlation or cause? Well, we've really specified what everything is. We know the executional formats and their role underneath big digital platform headings, and we can start to pull that apart. But then within that, I think the interpretation from planners is even more important. If you just press a button and optimize and take that result without an experienced eye on it,
yep,
you can get to the wrong decisions.
Yep, makes sense. So if you are lower funnel, you're looking at those kind of lower funnel conversions, get a pixel down, make sure you are planning and modelling effectively between all your different omni-channel strategies, and then Trade Desk, for example, has great solutions for kind of your path to conversion or search and social uplift as well.
And then I think probably just to round that out then, I think with all these different measurement methodologies we're talking about, it's worth interpreting a range. So if you've got multi-path attribution telling you a story, theoretically, although it comes from a very different place, theoretically modelling then the outputs of modelling should be backing up a similar story. Exactly. So your interpretations from modelling and other things essentially telling you the same story that multi-path attribution's telling you. If it is, then all these things sort of reinforce each other and can give you more confidence in your decisions.
Makes sense.
I think that also, sorry to jump in, but just to bring it back to like a client perspective as well, this information doesn't just kind of live in a vortex once we've got it as well, particularly at Bench. Like it's useful in a tangible sense in that it's really difficult when you're a smaller brand, particularly, to justify to your CMO or whoever you might be reporting into why we should keep the BVOD on the plan or why we should keep the digital out of home on the plan. And, whether it be modeling or whether it be path to conversion reporting or search and social uplift reporting or something similar from a different vendor, that data really helps to prove the value of every channel. Far too often, particularly with COVID, we see marketing budgets obviously reduce, and therefore the more expensive channels, which are usually your branding and upper funnel channels, fall off the plan. And that really has catastrophic catastrophic impact on the performance channels that you're over investing in. So realistically, it's really important to use this data once you've got it, not just let it sit there, so that you can A, justify your investments, but B, really kind of inform what your future strategy is going to be as well. So yeah, whatever you're using, I think making sure that you've got the team on hand, like we do at Bench, to be able to analyze that and make some sense of it is really important as well.
Yeah, of course. It's like turning your insights into action, not just letting it sit there. Like, why have you spent all this time and effort planning? This is how you close that loop. I think it's super important.
Yeah, don't forget your branding channels is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, easy. All right, so last topic of the day, measurement, reflection and recalibration. So I guess it'll be a question for all you guys. Let's go around the room for this one. Once you measure, it doesn't mean you stop measuring. So how important is it to reflect and recalibrate your measurement strategies? How can you show continued learning through future scenario planning? Starting with you, Steve.
Look, absolutely. It's really important across, an organisation and, agencies working with brands. You have to set up a continuous optimization environment. And that's absolutely critical. I mean, I think one of the advantages with modelling has been in the reduction of cost and its improved speed in recent years. It can now be used as a continuous measurement rather than a bit of a dated benchmark. But absolutely, I think that whole discipline of whenever you use research to effectively test a hypothesis on a plan, we'll change to this. You have to come back to it in a month or 3 months' time and continually come back and go, now does the measurement back up that it was the right thing to do? If we got the expected number, then we bake it in long term into our conventional wisdom. And absolutely rounding out that loop is as important as putting a measurement approach in the first place.
Yeah, makes sense. Definitely from a modelling perspective, you're constantly doing that as well. Steph, from your side?
Yeah, I think the key thing there is turning your insights into action. It's making sure that you're really looking at the data, and if you need to change your strategy, change your strategy. Don't be afraid. You're investing money in this. It's super important. It's about being able to take that data and understand the causal impact of your ads. So use it, change the strategy, pivot if you need to.
Yeah, pivot. Nate?
Yeah, I think I saw the CSO from Special, the agency, the creative agency in Melbourne, say this the other day, and I think it really sums it up nicely. It's not the data that makes the difference, it's what you do after that matters. And I think far too often we find that brands fall into this kind of cycle of comfortability, whether that be those kind of more established brands that have that traditional marketing mindset, or I think from a global level as well, when you've got a multi-market kind of strategy in place that sometimes gets a bit kind of the same. So getting out of that cycle and making sure that once you've put in all these hard yards of planning, activating, analyzing on the go, you use that data to inform the strategy moving forward. And yeah, as Steve and Steph have both said, like there's tools in place that can help you to do this, and you can kind of justify your strategy and continually test and learn your strategy as you go using these tools. So yeah, I think marketers need to make sure that they're continually reflecting, recalibrating, and looking at those business outcomes that we spoke about in the planning stage as well to make sure you are addressing them. Because if you're not doing it, your competitor probably is. So you're only going to be missing out.
Yeah.
And then to your point as well, I think that becomes more important because if you look at sort of media consumption patterns, they're changing quicker, right? So 4 years ago, flows from one media to another were probably a bit slower, whereas now they're a lot quicker. So those goalposts are changing on planners, faster and faster.
Yep, always keep planning. And I guess you're always talking about that loop of constantly planning, executing, reflecting, planning. It keeps going on and on.
It never stops. It's just always going.
Yep.
And you have a team behind you to help, so I think you utilise that.
Yeah, love that. Right, thanks guys. That's all about time we have today. Thank you very much to the three of you for contributing today. Steve from Analytic Edge, Steph from the Trade Desk, and Nate from Bench. Thanks for giving us your brain power today. I hope you each enjoyed the webinar today and learnt something. If you do have any other questions, we'll be sending around a feedback form after today's webinar where you can leave all your burning thoughts. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks
you.
Thanks so
you.
much. Thank you.